In a moment, we'll share in the Aleinu together. But there is something I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. We've been lied to. We've been lied to. This glorious translation that we have about the Aleinu, that every Shabbat we read together, it's a lie. It's not real. It's not true. It was penned by the founding rabbi of this community, Alef Meditative Synagogue, Rabbi Ted Falcon, many years ago. And despite the many iterations of our prayer book, it's one of those that I have kept. The words in English, the translation, is so beautiful. And I know it's a shock to many of us to learn that Rabbi Ted might have interpreted the Hebrew in a different way than the literal one. I can see in your face how distraught you are. But I have to say, this time I would at best qualify his translation as allegorical. I think that's the best word I can come up with right now. Allegorical, metaphorical. I mean, it's not his fault, but you have to understand that it's not just that the translation isn't accurate. We're used to that. Is that Rabbi Ted cut out chunks of the Aleinu altogether, remove them from the prayer book. And I gotta say, he's neither the first one nor the only rabbi who, in fact, has had to wrestle with the Aleinu. That prayer has historically deeply controversial. Take the second verse. We're all on page 12. Take the second verse, for example. We celebrate our uniqueness and that of others and seek to discover the wonder that we are. It's beautiful, isn't it? It is absolutely not what the Hebrew says. The Hebrew it pretends to relate to is shelo asanu kegoyei ha'aratzot velo samanu kemishpechot ha'adama shelo sam chelkenu kahem vegoralenu kechol hamonam. You know what that actually says? It speaks of praising God who, and I quote, has not made us like the nations of the world, and has not placed us like the families of the earth, who has not designed our destiny to be like theirs, nor our lot like that of their multitudes. That is, I would say, much more nationalistic, ethnocentric, me versus them, than the gorgeous translation that Rabbi Ted aimed for in his universalist rendition. What you don't know is that Rabbi Ted actually cut out a whole third of that sentence. Not only did he not translate it according to the Hebrew, which is fair enough, We've been there and done that before, but he literally lifted off the page a whole chunk of that sentence. That sentence doesn't end there. That sentence that says, nor our lot like that of their multitudes, continues in Hebrew, shehem mishtachavim lehevel varik umitpalelim el elo Yoshia, which means, for they, those multitudes, they bow to vanity and emptiness and pray to a God that cannot save. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. But us, closes the chapter, but us, we bend the knees and we bow, not like them. We bow to the one true God. That's what that sentence actually means. Now you can imagine how angry that sentence made those Christian leaders of the Middle Ages. You can't imagine how outraged they were when they found out that 3 times a day the Jews would say this line. And how they tried time and time again, published edict after edict, to ban the printing and the publication of the prayer books, Jewish prayer books, if they had that sentence in there. Not just the church, but also the governments around the church who also promulgated rules and laws to ban the Jews from using that sentence in their prayer books. So outraged the Christian world was by that word, by those words. And the truth of the matter is, in many communities throughout Europe, the rabbis, the leaders of the communities, didn't wait for the edicts and their laws to be promulgated. They themselves, from fear of retaliation, from fear of pogroms, from fear of attacks by the Christians onto their community, they themselves liberally lifted that sentence from the prayer book voluntarily, lived because they live in such great fear of the Christian communities around them. What the church believed, and how could you blame them, was that these words, let me read them again, they bow to vanity and emptiness and pray to a God that cannot save. They believed, and you can't blame them, that we were addressing those words to their Lord and Savior, to Jesus. And it's understandable because the word that says the God that cannot save is Yoshia in Hebrew, which, interestingly enough, is very close to the Hebrew version of the name Jesus. And so you can't blame the church for having conniption fits around Jewish prayers. You know, those edicts were promulgated and made into law as late at the end of the 18th century. They were around for a long time. The belief, though, that our prayer actually refers to Jesus is historically impossible. Scholars who study text and study the specific language that is used for every passage in the Torah or in our prayer books know that this is a very ancient wording in the Hebrew. And they go as far as thinking that it might have been one of those prayers that was penned by Joshua at the time of the siege of Jericho, as a way to uplift his soldiers as they were about to conquer the city. More realistically, though, most scholars now agree that this was actually a prayer that was written by one of the greatest rabbis of the Talmudic era in the 3rd century of the Common Era, the head rabbi of the Talmudic yeshivot, of the Talmudic schools of Sura and Pombedita in Babylon, where he lived and taught. Such a great rabbi that he doesn't have a real name. His name is Rav. That's what he's known throughout the Talmud. Rav. The Rav. That's it. Like when we say the Rav, everybody knows who he is. And so the Rav was the one who actually wrote a lot of the prayers that to this day are part of our daily liturgy, our Shabbat liturgy, but also a lot in our holidays as well. And according to the penmanship, according to the way that the prayer is written, it is almost certain that he was the one who wrote that prayer in the 3rd century of the Common Era while living in Babylon. So the understanding is that since Christianity wasn't anything at all at the time, I mean, it existed, but it wasn't the church yet. The God that, I had to look at it, the God that cannot save probably related to the pagans that lived in his neighborhood, in his area in Mesopotamia. But you can't also not understand what the church was coming from. Like historically, there were prayer books that were found, prayer books from the 12th century in the communities in northern France. They had, not only did they have that sentence that infuriated the church, but they even added to it. And I found what they had added. This is a 12th century version of the Aleinu in a French Siddur, a French prayer book. So they added, for they bow to vanity and emptiness and pray to a God that cannot save, that sentence that we have deleted from our prayer book. And then, if that wasn't enough, they wrote on top of that, a man, dust, blood, bile, dangling flesh, a worm, an impure one, an adulterer. Now you have to understand, the 12th century northern France was the time probably right after the Crusades, where Jews and leaders of communities saw their children, their wives, their neighbors massacred, executed, their head cut off, burned to death, as the Crusaders walked through the cities of Europe. And so it's understandable that their reaction was to, in fact, specify who they were talking about in the Aleinu. But it also points to the fact that if they felt the need to add all those words to be very specific, the original version did not, in fact, target Jesus at all. Now you have to understand that we have wrestled with the Aleinu for generations, as you can see. The Reform movement that was born in the 1800s, and up until very recently, actually, some of the latest edition of the Reform prayer book, we're talking in the mid-1900s, completely omitted the Aleinu altogether. It wasn't even there. They didn't even wonder if they were to keep that word or not that word, this sentence, not that. They just took it out altogether. There was no Aleinu at the end of any worship in the Reform movement. Just bear in mind that the Reform movement's aim was to help Jews come out of the ghettos and assimilate in the greater secular nation states that were just being created. And that's why the Reform movement did everything they could to make sure that they were kosher to the outer world. Nowadays, both in the Reform, the latest editions of the Reform, Reconstructionist, and Conservative movement, the Aleinu it's back into the prayer books, but it is being offered different versions both in English and actually even different versions in the Hebrew as well, and it is euphemistically translated as well. I found in the Reconstructionist book, at the very bottom of each page, in very small font, the original version as well. And that in all three prayer books, that line that has the God that cannot save, that is eliminated, that is not there, is nowhere to be found. Just like Rabbi Ted did in his version of the prayer. So you see, he's not alone. He's not alone in the thoughtfulness that he brought to creating and writing the prayer or the translation. He went also along with what most denominations decided to do as well. The only denominations that are keeping the original are the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox. They have all these words that are shared with you and then some, because there's another whole paragraph of the Aleinu that we don't have in our prayer book at all. It's fascinating. It's fascinating how history evolves and how we evolve, and depending on the context of where our communities are and the time in which we live, we would make decisions this way or that way to be mindful of what it is we share within our sanctuaries. You know, this is one thing that I just delight in, to be part of a tradition that is 3,000 years old. It's very rare to have still a living tradition that is that old. And when you're that old, you have had so much time to learn and to grow and to expand in so many different ways, in so many different directions, that make this tradition of ours one of the richest spiritual traditions there is in the world. It's astonishing. It's short of a miracle, really, if not it is an outright miracle. And the depth and breadth of what can be found in this tradition of ours, in this lineage of ours, is astonishing. From the most literal level to the deepest mystical level. It's just incredible. And at the same time, when you live in a tradition that is 3,000 years old, you carry within your bag a lot of masters and teachers that were born and raised and spoke and existed and wrote at a very, very different time than ours. And so time and time again, there is this wrestling that each and every one of us has to make between what it is we keep and what it is we don't keep. What is that is relevant and that is positive and necessary, and what it is that maybe in this day and age we might need to let go of. And there are different points of view, and none of them is absolutely right and none of them is absolutely wrong. It's all on a continuum. You know, the more Orthodox among us would say you keep the tradition as it is. And it doesn't matter of your seasonal discomfort with the tradition. The tradition has been here way before you were born, and it'll still be here way before you will be gone. And if in each generation we would have cut a little bit out of the tradition, what would we be left with after 3,000 years? And so they say, don't touch anything. Keep the whole thing. Who are you to decide what goes in and what goes out? But then there are others like us who say, yeah, but this is offensive. This is not really relevant. This, so we were maybe more prone to retranslate, to reinterpret, sometimes to leave out a few words here and there. Ultimately, what it comes down to, for me, and it's always been the case, is the decision we have to make for ourselves as to what this is for. What is the purpose of having this? Of meeting together in synagogues around the world and saying these words. What is that we are seeking to accomplish? What is our kavanah? What is our intention? What are these texts, whether it's the Torah or our prayer books, what are they there to serve? What purpose do they serve? And once you define what these texts and prayers have to do, what purpose they serve, then you can decide what to keep and what not to keep, what contributes to serving the purpose you're serving and what does not. And that's the foundation of all our decisions. At Bet Aleph, we understand that our text, our scriptures, our prayer books are here in the service of healing, in the service of holding, in the service of personal spiritual growth, of individual growth, and ultimately in the service of awakening to the oneness of being that expresses as everything and everyone. That is our foundation. That is the purpose of our community. That is, like we say in French, our raison d'être, our reason for being. And so everything that flows from that, our prayer book and how we understand text, is in the service of that purpose. If we are unable to look in the Hebrew, in the original, and find within what serves our purpose, if what is written in fact is an obstacle to our growth, then it is better for us to either reinterpret it altogether or to leave it off. Those texts that are very ethnocentric, very nationalistic, very ethnocentric, if we were to keep them as they are, they would seed in us as we repeat them time after time after time in a prayer for a circle 3 times a day. But if we repeat them time after time, we become what we repeat. And so if we stand in a place that is very ethnocentric and very nationalistic, that is the consciousness that we are going to create for ourselves. To us, who seek to move beyond and grow past the ethnocentric identity and step into a global-centric, a universal-centric identity, then those translations, those texts will prevent us, in fact, from awakening to that next stage of consciousness. Does that make sense? So let's take a look at the Aleinu, if you have it in front of you still. Because it's a glorious translation. And the truth of the matter is, for drama purposes, I exaggerated a little bit. Rabbi Ted's translation is much closer to the Hebrew than I led you to believe, except for that second sentence and for the fact that a lot is deleted. Most of the rest is actually very near to the Hebrew and is a legitimate, actually, translation of the Hebrew. We are the ones given this way of praising the Holy One of all being. Right? We are the ones given this way. Others are given different ways, different paths. We are the ones who are given this way. Right? We are the chosen people for the Jewish way. We're not the chosen people, as in we're the best and we're the chosen. We are the chosen people for the way called Torah, for the path called Judaism. And we are the ones given this way. This is the way we are gifted. This is the practice we have. Others have others. That we might understand and express the greatness of the one who shapes all creation. That is the purpose. That is why we're here after 3,000 years. That we might understand for ourselves that oneness, that one vibration is expressing in all that is, in every shape, in every form, in every time, in every place. And then, once we understand that, not just intellectually, but in our hearts and in our soul, then we express it in our lives. We make our lives an expression of that understanding. That is our purpose. That is the aim that here in this community of ours we pursue. The next sentence is the one that is freely translated. We celebrate our uniqueness and that of others and seek to discover the wonder that we are, because we are that wonder. Can you imagine? We are the embodiment of the divine. Through and through every cell of our being, the magic, the vibrating energy of that which is energizing everything. Can you imagine the wonder that we are, each and every one of us? Those we love and those we don't. Everyone. Those who vote like us and those who don't. Everyone is a wonder. Everyone a miracle. Therefore, we bend the knees and we bow because it's so humbling, but in a joyful way. Not in a beating yourself up, bowing and bending your knees, but it's like, yes. Oh, how humbling, how amazing, how breathtaking this is. And what can we do but just say how grateful we are for just being alive? Before the ruler of all ruling, in the presence of that which is within us, around us, through every part of ourselves. As it is said, because this is actually part of our scripture, as it is said in our scripture, then we shall truly realize the Eternal One as universal being. We will. The point of our being alive, of our being born, is that we might realize the eternal as universal being. And that's why we are here. As far as our tradition is concerned, as far as all mystical traditions are concerned, the purpose of our being alive is that we might know ourselves to be the Divine One, that we might awaken. That's why we're here. That's all. There's nothing else. And on that day, the day that we will all realize that together, we will dance in the streets. We will celebrate one another. We will embrace each other. There'll be peace in the world. We'll know that we have no enemies, that we are just one people. And we'll celebrate. It will be celebrated by all.